bundle in her bag. She picked it up and held it to her chest. One little slip and the whole thing might shatter. Without a doubt, it was the best thing she'd ever found, and she was tempted to keep it for herself. But empty stomach wouldn't allow that. She picked her way through the rubble, back to the wide stretch of dirt and scrub grass that served as a road. The pitcher would be worth something to Kate and Gary. Between them and their 5-year-old daughter Maggie, they always needed extra water on hand. Only their generosity that kept Lara from starvation. Because they were a family, their allotment of produce was higher, and they usually had a little to spare for Lara when she had items worth trading. She didn't care for the pity in their eyes when they spoke with her, but hunger outweighed pride. Still, they had been kind since Tabitha's disappearance, and she knew Gary dealt with her fairly. That he received more for her items at the market than he gave her was understandable. The loss was acceptable, if it meant she didn't have to deal with a bot ever again. Lara hurried down the road, glancing occasionally at the ruins to either side. A few of the walls were still upright, defying time and nature, sometimes teetering in the wind. The buildings here hadn't been built to last. Wood and crumbly plaster couldn't compare to the brick and concrete structures in the market. At the 3-way intersection, she glanced up at the signpost. Tabitha had shown it to her when they were children. Lara couldn't read the beat-up sign hanging from it, but she recognized the letters. She'd asked her sister what the letters meant once. The way home. She followed the north road back toward the collection of shacks that the humans of Cheyenne dwelled in. The return trip wasn't long, but heat and hunger slowed Lara's pace. The flattened ruins left her exposed to the wind and the biting dust it carried. She kept her head down and adjusted the cloth over her face. She'd be picking grit out of the most uncomfortable places for days. The landscape changed as she reached the outskirts of town. The dirt, scrub grass, and rubble slowly gave way to small, rickety buildings that creaked in the wind. Some of the structures had been standing for longer than anyone could remember, repaired with whatever scraps were available as the years passed. It wasn't uncommon for a few of the shacks to fall apart whenever one of the frequent dust storms blew through, but the inhabitants just gathered the pieces and rebuilt. The shacks, spread out on the edges of the settlement, were packed more densely as she walked. With the increase in buildings came the stench. Refuse and human waste so potent she considered turning back and heading into the wastes every time she smelled it anew. She turned onto one of the northward roads, little more than a narrow patch of cracked, hard-packed dirt. It would be mud within minutes of the first rain. To the west, the sun approached the horizon. The people she passed were finishing up their daily business. Better to be indoors before nightfall. The cold was one thing, but no one wanted to be caught outside by a bored, wandering gearhead. She saw a few of the marks painted on the shacks she passed, a round gear fashioned to look like a skull. Warlord's symbol. On bots, it meant they were in his service. On a human's home, it meant they'd broken the rules. The first time didn't usually result in death, but the shacks with his mark were often dark and quiet. Gary and Kate resided close to Lara's home. She hurried to their shack, cradling her bag like it was the most precious thing in the world. Glancing up and down the street, she knocked on their door. "Who is it?" The muffled voice belonged to Gary. "It's Lara," she replied, pulling the cloth down from her face. The door pulled back slightly and slid to the side. Gary stood in the opening, a tall, thin man whose head nearly touched the top of the doorway. He wasn't old. He was probably in his early 30s. But years of hardship and scavenging and Cheyenne's unforgiving weather had aged him. Despite the harsh lines on his face and his thick beard, he had kind eyes. "Everything all right?" he asked. "You won't believe what I found." Lara opened her bag and pulled out the pitcher. "Lara, wait." "It would be perfect for you and Kate, and little Maggie." "Lara, we need to talk." "Isn't it beautiful?" Lara removed the cloth and held the pitcher out to him. "Have you ever seen anything like it?" She bit her lip as Gary stared at it, her arms aching as seconds passed. Surely it was worth more than a strip of dried meat or a single vegetable. Finally, Gary raised his gaze to meet hers, guilt and pity clear in his furrowed brow. Lara's stomach sank. "You could hold a day's worth of water in this," she explained, turning the pitcher to display the inside. Or food. You could keep—"
"Lara, we can't trade anymore."
She lowered her arms, staring at him, silenced by her disbelief. Had he misspoken, or had she misheard him?